Barry, who's sitting at the end of the table in front of me, who is the purchaser of 204 Hanover Street. I'll try to explain why we are back, because some of you heard the presentation last month. Primarily has to do with zoning issues, but let me continue the introduction. That is the property in question at 204 Hanover Street, which is to the end of the street closest to the Greenway. As you've been told, has been the site of a retail store more recently, which was a jewelry shop, and has been vacant for some time since then, purchased by Mr. Barry with the intent and plan to have Siobhan Carew, who is sitting next to him, the owner of Pomodoro Restaurant, which is at 319 Hanover Street, has been there for 22 years, has lost the lease there after 22 years, and wishes to move the restaurant into this space. When we first came before you, we had requested a series of changes for the building, including changing one of the floors from office space to residential. The result of the changes were that we had a number of variance requests that were issued by ISD, and a singular conditional use, which I will try to explain this to you in a minute, and as a result of which we made changes to the plan so that this current plan that is being circulated with that cover sheet has one singular violation of the zoning code, which requires a conditional use. So as soon as I begin to bore you, you can nod your heads, but let me tell you what that means. The zoning code has three categories of uses. A use is either allowed, meaning that if it's allowed in the code, you can ask to change to that use, and for zoning purposes, you would not have to go through a zoning board of appeal process. The other two categories are conditional use, and you'll see in the cover of that, which I will be describing, there's a test that the zoning board of appeal will apply for a conditional use, and a restaurant use in this location, which is the Hanover Street Community Commercial District, is conditional. It requires you to show several items, again listed on that cover sheet, to the Board of Appeal as to why this is an appropriate use for that location. And then the last is variance. We are not asking for a variance. The standard for a variance is quite different and quite high, meaning that you have to show that this property is unique or unusual and requires zoning relief by the Board of Appeal in order to have the reasonable use on it. So in the last proposal, we had several variance requests, one of which, for example, included the head house of the building, which we've removed. We have the same principal plan for the restaurant. The restaurant is the ground floor and the basement. The ground floor will have seating, the basement will not have seating. This restaurant will have a total of 39 seats. 8 of those seats are in a recessed area at the front, meaning the front of the restaurant will be set back, and there'll be a few tables in the front on the property of the restaurant for dining outside. It will be railed off from the sidewalk. Nothing will appear on the sidewalk. So you have 8 outside and 31 inside. So it's a rather small restaurant. What appears on the roof is a vent that's needed to vent the kitchen. That was in the last plan. And there are vents for utilities that are required for air conditioning and so forth, both for the restaurant and the rest of the units. So those items could not be reviewed. You'll see that also in the plan. So it's rather an empty rooftop. What we would tell you is that Pomodoro that intends to use the space For 22 years, has operated with a beer and wine license, and its current location, that would be the same here. The closing hour has been 11 p.m., which would be the same here as well. And the only difference in service from what exists today is there will be a lunch service. She does not currently serve lunch at 319 Hanover Street. So you heard most of the restaurant before, so it's the same. We haven't changed anything about the plan on that, but we've eliminated the zoning requirements. So in terms of what we are trying to get across to you tonight, I gave you the handout about what the Board of Appeal next week will consider as to be the facts that they would like to entertain in order to make a decision as to whether this should have zoning relief. That is the specific site and appropriate location for such use. Meaning, is that location appropriate for the restaurant? Needless to say, we believe it is, primarily because that part of Hanover Street, the predominant use is for restaurants. This is not a large banquet-style restaurant, but not a small restaurant. The second is, will the use adversely affect the neighborhood? We say again, because of the nature of her business, she's never had a complaint filed with any board for 22 years. We wouldn't expect that that would change from her current location to this location under these conditions. Next is there a serious hazard to vehicles of pedestrian use? And the answer is the front of Hanover Street, that curbing on Hanover Street during the day, as you probably are aware, is loading zone, meaning that deliveries are taken from loading zone. Her deliveries are done by a van that she owns for pickup, so it will not encumber double parking or anything of that sort. You'll be able to use the loading zone just as every other business on that block does. Next is there a nuisance created by the use? We will never reach the standard of nuisance, meaning as far as noise disruption. Once again, it's never been the case for 22 years, and we rely on our history to prove that. And lastly is there going to be adequate and appropriate facilities for the proper operation of a restaurant? And you'll see in the plans, this will be a newly built-out restaurant up to code with very sophisticated venting and scrubbing systems for vents. So we think that we would meet all of those standards next week at the zoning board, and we would hope that in changing the plan the way we have, you would agree with that as well.
Thank you. May I ask for abutters to comment?
Would you like me to speak from here?
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is George DuBois. Pleasure to address you all. I represent Angie Romano. She's seated next to me. And to answer any questions or to make any statements that may be appropriate. Mr. Ferrullo, I have a lot of respect for. I know he appears before this board and he has a lot of credibility, but we only can convey what he's told. He made a statement to you a moment ago, and I hope you haven't forgotten. He said that Mrs. Carew, the proposed restaurateur that wants to move a restaurant down the street, has never been before any boards. Never been in any trouble before, but I was going on the internet and find out she has 2 or 3 businesses in Brookline that shut her down for, quote, residents urinating on the sidewalk, harassing residents, and the town of Brookline wrote in this article that they've changed the way they do business with liquor establishments. Now apparently it didn't end there, because last year she entered into a $200,000 settlement with the Department of Labor because she wasn't paying her businesses and her workers the wages that they were entitled to. So I just want to disabuse these you people of any notion that Ms. Carew comes before you with a clean slate and is deserving of this. Notwithstanding, let me address the issues that are important. This proposal that they now put before you is virtually identical to the proposal that you voted no on. Let me remind you, the only thing they did was take, they wanted 2 apartments. They took out 1 apartment and decided to call that an office. Now that's a lawyer's trick, because all that does is takes away the need for a zoning variance. So instead of needing a zoning variance, all they need to get is a conditional use permit. And Mr. Ferrulo, who knows the law very well, as I said, without being redundant, appears before you very often. And the first criteria for a conditional use permit, according to the Section 6 of the zoning ordinance, is that the specific site is an appropriate location for such use. Now, I went back into the building jacket, went back to 1929 when that building was built. Since 1929, that building has never been used for a restaurant. Therefore, by mere virtue of non-use as a restaurant, it is not an appropriate location for a restaurant. I'm going to address that issue a little more in detail. Now, the owners of that property were the Milanos, who owned the Union Oyster House. And just to remind you, I made the same pitch when I was before you last time. If anybody knows how to run a restaurant, it's the Milanos. However, since they've owned that property, going back to the 60s, it's been their family jewelry store, it's been a photo store, it's been a clothing store, and most recently, again, a jewelry store that suffered a catastrophic flood. And I don't know if they had enough insurance and they didn't reopen. Now, what Ms. Carew, and she doesn't own the property, by the way, Mr. Berry owns it according to public records, wants to take out a door, the entrance door to the apartments, which is now currently on Hanover Street, and transfer that opening into an alleyway, which is about 4 feet wide. Then what they want to do is put a seating area, although recessed, but it's directly abutting the sidewalk. And then what my client, Mrs. Romano, who's been here since 1947, and I noticed, let me just go aside a moment, every time we get an opposition or somebody in favor, it's always the restaurant owners. We had a meeting in front of the building, waiters with aprons came over, people that are in the restaurant business. So there's a dynamic here where Mrs. Romano and her family, who by the way, they're in their 70s, they all live on Hanover Street, and this is why this proposal will be very acute and against their best interest, are against it. So we have this dynamic where true North Enders that live here, that work here, that were born here and want to die here, are sort of having a battle with the restaurant owners who would like nothing better to do than to add another restaurant to the North End. You already have 142 restaurants, and to have another one, quite frankly, is not in anybody's best interest. Now, anybody that comes down to the North End will see you can't even walk the sidewalks anymore. And you have lines out every business, out the door. And that's exactly what's going to happen if this proposal were allowed to go forward. But let me just tell you, to add another dynamic to this, they want to put, if you look at the property, Mrs. Romano's building is 14 apartments, I strike that, 10 apartments that is almost twice the height of the existing building that they want to put their restaurant in. What that means is they're going to put all the mechanical equipment, all the ventilation equipment, right below the windows where Mrs. Romano's tenants, and some of them are here, who pay below market rent. You know how the rents have gone crazy in the North End. She's a true mother of everybody in the North End. She takes care of people that buy flowers. She takes care of the young college kids and graduates that want to live in an apartment, a nice apartment in the North End that's relatively cheap, and she's a lifelong North End resident. So what they want to do is disrupt the tranquility of the people that live there. So that's one of the major issues. And then what also is going to happen is, no matter how well-intentioned Mr. Ferrulo and his client are, you're going to have people making a lot of noise, there's going to be lines, and she has a flower shop, and she has tenants that want to get into the building. I don't care how much they promise you it's not going to happen, it's going to happen. Now what they did is, to show you that how this proposal is no different than the previous one, they have an elevator that's going to be right up under these windows. Now you know how much noise these hydraulic elevators make. Now all they did was take out the head house. Head house is a little structure they built on the roof and put a tubing for whatever reason. I'm not an elevator mechanic, so that's not changed. Nothing has changed except for to get around having to get a variance. They decided to take out the request for a second apartment, which incidentally, that building has always been used for 2 apartments, which means that it had an illegal second apartment on the line. It was built for the purposes of an office. So now, if he decides, and I asked this question, and I don't really get a satisfactory answer, an office is worse than an apartment. What kind of office? How big is the office going to be? Where are the people going to park? You know, how are the people going to get in? They have to travel at least 100 feet to get to the front door now. The door was originally on the front of Hanover Street. Now you have to travel down an alley, which my client put a gate on and put no trespassing. It's been there for 50 years. He's essentially taken over the alley. Now, in addition to that, I'd like to close, and I know the hour is long. My client got 140 signatures from everybody, anybody in the North End that says we do not want a restaurant here. These are the people that live in the North End. Now, don't own restaurants, don't own businesses. These people that own businesses would love to see another restaurant. But the people that live here do not. The will of the people, through this petition, through the people, I hope that will speak against this. And on behalf of my client, I would respectfully ask this membership to vote again, not to reconsider this, or if you're going to reconsider it, vote again and say no. Thank you.
Are there any abutters, any of those residents who would like to speak? Please.
Right now, I have trouble getting in my building, and there's not even another restaurant there. I live right next to the flower shop. On a Friday, Saturday, you can't walk. I can't even get into the building. I have to say, excuse me, and they don't even move. They stand there, they smoke. And I sweep every morning. I should have taken a picture of all the cigarettes that I pick up every morning. That's number one. Number two, I'm elderly. I like to go to sleep. I work still. And I think I deserve a little peace and quiet. I lived through the big dig for 15 years of noise, pollution, and everything else. I don't think I should get it in my old age. Am I right? What do you think? I think you're right.
Any other folks? Anyone who is not an abutter?
I'm actually an Angie's son, and I'd like to make a short comment on this.
Yes.
I grew up in the North End. I love my mother. I support my mother, and I support the community. I always have, and it's always in my heart. However, our attorney is absolutely right. 142 restaurants in less than 2 square miles. You've had studies from prestigious colleges showing how congested Hanover Street is. You have restaurant associations that want to close Hanover Street, put tables and chairs so the fire department can't even come down the street. These are proposals, and I'm not saying that they actually went through, but these have been proposals that people, ideas that people have had. Correct? Has anyone else heard these proposals?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Think about what is actually going on here. She does. I witnessed the cigarette butts that she cleans. She's not opposed to it. She has Toronto. She has Mother Anna. She's been a good neighbor to all of these people for years. She has a right to open up a window in the summer and not have to listen to the hydraulic systems, to the air conditioning systems, to breathe in the smoke and the fumes that can be coming from all of these vents and these offices and these restaurants. All of you have a right. If any of you were to be put in front of and have something a few feet away from your window, how would you like to live like that? That's all I have to say. And that's just in support of my mother.
Thank
and
you.
for the whole community.
Great. Thanks.
I agree.
One last,
Emergency vehicles need to have access.
Right. So, as Victor described, we're going to take a vote as to whether this is substantially different, and we want to take it up again. Victor, if you could do it in like 30 seconds. There is a letter that we already wrote that says what the points were that were the most important in the last discussion. So this will be the fastest that Victor's ever read, if he can do it.
There you go.
I'll read it quickly. These were the points made, which we wrote to the Board of Appeal in notifying the Board of Appeal of the opposition.
And that's 30 seconds.
All right, I'll take a deep breath. Concerns were raised regarding noise, trash, foot traffic, and the use of the alley which separates the subject property from the abutter's property. The appellant proposes to move the entrance to the upper floors from its present location on Hanover Street to a location on the common alleyway. The reconfiguration would permit the appellant to set the entire length of the building's facade back from the sidewalk in order to accommodate permanent seating for 8 persons at tables located within the property line. Also prior to the vote, comment was made regarding the loss of another retail establishment in the north end by the proposed change of use from retail to restaurant. The comment related to the fact that restaurant use in this restaurant-saturated neighborhood has had the effect of driving up rents, which retail businesses serving the community cannot afford to pay.
Thank you.
That's what we said.
So that's for the summary of the last meeting. So, let's take the ballots. We will use ballot number 1, and the vote will be specifically, do we want to reconsider this, or do we want to let our vote, our previous letter stand because we don't think it's substantially different enough? A vote for yes, support would be for reconsideration. A vote for opposing would be we're letting the letter that we wrote last time stand.
Before people vote, can we get a point of clarification, maybe just a quick summary as to what the key differences are between Mr. Furlow's proposal this month versus last month? I mean, I think I understand it. It's changing from 2 residences to 1 residence and an office. Am I missing anything?
Primarily the change is zoning issues, eliminated variance issues. Point out on the residential, just as much as one would, we would rather it be a residential unit. We've asked our butters to confirm their support of that in writing. That's been 5 requests, and we haven't an answer on that. So the zoning part today allows for an office use on the 2nd floor. So we're leaving the zoning as it is. So the primary,
Instead of asking for a change.
correct. So the primary zoning issue is the singular zoning issue of changing the ground floor to a restaurant.
But the issue of conditional use for the restaurant, that hasn't changed from last month.
That will not change.
Okay. Thank you.
So the voting, and I hope I'm consistent here, the vote is, the support or yes vote would be, yes, we'll reconsider it in another vote. The opposed vote is, we already wrote a letter, we're leaving it as it stands because we don't see that it's substantially different. Nikki, did you have a question?
I thought that's the opposite of what you said before.
No.
If you vote
Well, it's good
opposed, we don't consider it any further. Correct.
And if you vote support, it means the process goes to the next step. Yes. Yes.
Shouldn't there be a motion to vote on?
Sure.
Yes. I'll take a motion. Yes.
Second.
Thank you, parliamentarian. Where's the sergeant at arms? We have a motion. We have a second for this vote that, as I characterized it, support means we'll consider it again. Opposed means we let the letter that we have stand. Votes in support. Ten support, 27 opposed. So the letter as written last time will stand, and the changes are not deemed by this group to be sufficient for a new vote.